After reading The Lost Symbol, I was intrigued with Washington, D.C. It's a city overflowing with esoteric symbolism. Zooming in from space as we can in Google Earth, let me point out a few landmarks. Here's the White House, Capitol Building, Washington Monument, Jefferson Memorial, Lincoln Memorial, and the Pentagon just across the Potomac. Rick Campbell has uncovered much of the underlying geometry of the city on his informative site, dcsymbols.com. He sees the following diagram in the streets and interconnection of monuments. The geometry consists of a pentagram over a cube, all contained within an overarching pyramid. Each one of these shapes carries a meaning we'll be exploring. We'll see later in Egypt how the pentagram symbolizes the microcosm, which is everything in the universe, human scale or smaller. The cube is a recurrent esoteric symbol for the body that we'll be running into all over the world. I found a pair of 3, 4, 5 triangles between the cube and the pyramid. Turning off the cube layer, you see the rectangle surrounding the White House is also made up of a pair of interlocking triangles, this time with 5, 12, 13 proportions. 3, 4, 5 and 5, 12, 13 are the first two Pythagorean triplets. As you'll begin to appreciate, Pythagorean knowledge figures prominently in decoding this mystery. Where have we seen an unfinished pyramid before? On the back of the dollar bill, of course. If we illuminate the DC pyramid with the same all-seeing eye of providence, we are directed to a specific building. Is this the eye of providence we are looking at, or its older incarnation as the eye of Horus? Either way, what is behind the all-seeing eye of the sun? It's the headquarters of Scottish Freemasonry, which goes by many names, including the Supreme Council, Mother Council of the World, and House of the Temple. This building is loaded with Egyptian symbolism, with a 13-step unfinished pyramid on top, just like on the dollar bill, and 2 giant sphinxes flank the entrance out front. The architect John Russell Pope modeled the 1911 building after the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, now a part of Turkey. As one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, it served as tomb of King Mausolus, which is where we get the word mausoleum. The House of the Temple correspondingly serves as tomb of Albert Pike, Sovereign Grand Commander, Confederate General, and the most famous Freemason of his times. Pike wrote Morals and Dogma, the handbook formerly given to new members up until 1974, which details the 33 ranks of Freemasonry. The House of the Temple is where the climax in The Lost Symbol takes place. Campbell shows how the elevation was designed ad quadratum, which is Latin for by the square. Ad quadratum is a sacred design template we'll see employed in the District of Columbia itself and at Chartres Cathedral. The sunburst above the entry is at the center of the square, and the top corner marks the symbolic apex of the unfinished pyramid. The bottom corner presumably marks the crypt where Pike is interred. Scottish Freemasons are really into the number 33. There are 33 columns in the House of the Temple that are 33 feet high. This is the place where a hard-working initiate can attain the highest 33rd degree from the 33 members of the Supreme Council. 33rd degree Masons are often found in positions of power. Many presidents of the United States were Freemasons. The Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania has a permanent exhibit featuring the portrait and signature of each of these presidents, with a record of their Masonic careers. It is difficult to verify Masonic membership because some members do not make their involvement a matter of public record. However, each lodge keeps its own records. I find it interesting that George Washington, Harding, Eisenhower, Carter, and the younger Bush all chose to be sworn into the office of the president with a hand on this Masonic Bible dating from 1770. One has to be male and believe in a supreme being to seek membership as a Scottish Freemason. They insist their fraternity is not a religion, although atheists are ineligible for membership. Freemasonry is not a secret society, but members are strongly admonished, under pain of death, not to reveal core secrets. Much of what happens inside the house of the temple has been pieced together by outside researchers in recent years, and this has been brought forward in Dan Brown's book, The Lost Symbol. Members can rise to the 32nd degree through hard work and study, but only those selected by the Supreme Council may attain the highest 33rd degree. Richard Hoagland and Mike Barra have dredged up the most interesting connections between the Scottish Freemasons and NASA. Here is Cape Canaveral at Kennedy Space Center. These are the two launch pads where all the Apollo and Space Shuttle missions left Earth. Here is the single runway, runway 33. Of all the vectors they could have chosen for the strip, why did NASA choose 33 degrees west of north? If that seems like circumstantial evidence to you, how about this? Here is astronaut Buzz Aldrin, 33rd degree Mason, on the moon holding the flag of the Supreme Council, which he later brought back to Earth and gave to the Supreme Commander of the House of the Temple. These examples show that the Freemasons and NASA are obsessed with this number. I'm wondering what's so special about 33. Where else does this number appear? Jesus is said to have performed 33 miracles and to have died at age 33. Perhaps this is no coincidence. The Bible says King David, father of the famous Solomon who built the first temple in Jerusalem, reigned for 33 years. In the Kabbalah, or Jewish mysticism, there are 10 Sephiro in the Tree of Life, plus another hidden one called Doth. Adding the 22 paths between Sephiro brings the total up to the magic 33. My theory involves the Schumann resonance. This is the frequency at which the Earth vibrates. Scientists have measured this standing wave at 7.83 Hz, with a wavelength equal to the circumference of the Earth. This inaudible low hum is due to lightning discharges in our conductive ionosphere, causing the planet to actually ring like a bell. If you do the simple calculation, which I've done here in a spreadsheet, you'll see that middle C is 33 harmonics, or 32 overtones above the Schumann resonance. Sound implausible? Think of it this way. Our bodies resonate 33 octaves above the Earth's fundamental vibration. This fits with the ancient Hermetic motto, as above, so below. I find it incredible that the UN emblem divides the Earth into 33 sectors. This has to be more than coincidental. The human spinal column appropriately has 33 vertebrae if you count the fused bones in the lower spine individually. 33 might very well be built into the architecture of the universe. For further confirmation, let's take a look at the Great Seal of the United States of America, as shown on the back of a $1 bill. Let's start with the obverse side of the Great Seal. That's the side with the eagle. Most important to our current line of inquiry, let's count the number of feathers on the wings. The left wing has 33 feathers, and the right wing has 32. Could these refer to the 33 harmonics or 32 overtones just discussed in relation to the Schumann resonance? I think Rick Campbell has correctly decoded the controlling geometry. 3 circles with their centers on each other's circumferences form a kind of double Vesica Pisces, if you will. A Vesica Pisces is formed whenever 2 equally sized circles come together, such that their centers are on each other's circumferences. A Star of David emerges from the 3 circles' intersection points. Examining the reverse of the Great Seal, we find the same controlling geometry. Look at the letters picked out of the mottos Annuit Coptis and Novus Ordo Seclorum. Never mind right now what these mottos signify. The letters at the points of the Star of David are A, S, N, O, and M. Rearranging, we get Mason. So to summarize, we've seen how the House of the Temple presides over a street pyramid in Washington, D.C. There is a clear Masonic connection to the office of the President, NASA, and the United Nations. The Scottish Freemasons are obsessed with the number 33, which is echoed in the Judeo-Christian tradition, having a resonance both with the human body and the earth. It's no secret that Masons trace their history back through the Knights Templar. I was amazed to discover there is an urban village straight across the Potomac from the White House called Rosslyn. Many researchers believe one of the Templar factions fled to Scotland after the infamous raid that destroyed their order. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland was the place featured in the Da Vinci Code, where Sophie learned she was a direct descendant of Jesus, and where she was reunited with her bloodline. Friday the 13th, October 1307, was the date most of the Templars got arrested, had their considerable assets seized, were interrogated and tortured to death by agents of the French king, acting in cooperation with the Pope. Knowing the connections between the Templars, Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, and the Scottish Freemasons made me take a closer look at Rosslyn, Virginia. Rosslyn has two important features, a dense urban village and the Marine Corps War Memorial. So I drew a line from the center of the Marine Corps Memorial in Rosslyn, Virginia, to the center of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. You've got to love Google Earth. The Great Circle Path passes precisely over the apex of the Eye of Providence and the entire D.C. street pyramid, arguably confirming my line of reasoning. Before we leave Scotland entirely, let's take a detour to Edinburgh. The Royal Mile is Edinburgh's oldest and busiest tourist street. If we measure a line from the facade of Holyrood Abbey, built in 1128 by King David I of Scotland, to the circular tower in Edinburgh Castle, built by the same king, we find that it measures almost precisely 8/7 of a mile. The Royal Mile referred to in Edinburgh is therefore the Egyptian Royal Mile by definition. This is a memorable and important unit because, as Richard Heath shows in his book Sacred Number and the Origins of Civilization, there are exactly 3,456 Egyptian royal miles in the polar radius of the Earth. King David built these structures right at the beginning of the Knights Templars' existence, shortly after the Knights returned from Jerusalem and the Gothic building explosion began. Could King David I of Scotland have been connected to the knowledge the Templars unearthed from the House of David in Jerusalem? Let's return to Washington, D.C., and see how the Royal Mile is encoded there, in plain sight. Zooming into the area in front of the Capitol building, many researchers have identified Masonic compasses built into the street plan. The compasses that run along Pennsylvania and Maryland avenues point to the White House and the Jefferson Memorial. The spread of the compasses is 1 royal mile. I might chalk this up to coincidence if it wasn't for the diagram Richard Heath has published in Sacred Number. Heath's diagram is drawn as a grid of equilateral triangles, so every edge measures 1 royal mile. The Jefferson Memorial, White House, and House of the Temple are centrally located on these nodes. The point of the pentagon facing the White House is at this node. This is simply too much coincidence to have not been the product of intentional design. I find the ancient Flower of Life diagram fits perfectly into this grid. The Flower of Life has been found all over the world. Wikipedia lists the Flower of Life in 15 countries so far. Here's the Flower of Life at the Osirion Temple in Abydos, Egypt, which is a minimum of 3,300 years old. It's a little-known fact that Leonardo da Vinci even studied the Flower of Life. This is the second depiction of a cube we've seen in DC. Metrology, the science of measurement, is one of the keys to deciphering secret architecture. Each side of the larger cube spans 2 triangles, forming an edge length equal to 2 royal miles. The polar radius of the Earth is 1728 times 2 royal miles. This equals the 3456 royal miles referenced by the Edinburgh Royal Mile. The number 1728 links DC with the mythical New Jerusalem described in the Bible. And the city lieth 4 square, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. The dimensions of New Jerusalem describe a cube whose volume is 1728 billion furlongs. Did you ever wonder why the U.S. and Israel have such a strong bond? DC is the New Jerusalem. Here's the 1992 Israeli Supreme Court building in Jerusalem. Does this pyramid on top containing a window look familiar? It appears to be the Eye of Providence, the same symbol found in the streets of DC and on the dollar bill. Many researchers have seen the Tree of Life from Jewish mysticism encoded in DC's traffic circles and monuments. However, DCSymbols.com is the only place that shows how the streets and traffic circles match this early depiction of the Porte Lucis Tree of Life from 1516. The Portal of Light version is shaped like an actual tree. Maybe that's where the Tree of Life got its name. Scott Circle's gently curving streets mimic the shape of the Pythagorean Y. In The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, author David Oveson says, "The Pythagorean Y is a vestigial drawing of a path through life, in which one is perpetually presented with a choice of symbolic directions. Should one do good or bad?" Scott Circle is in the position in the Tree of Life known as Doth, the hidden Sephiro. According to the Kabbalah, the reason Doth is depicted as hidden is because humans who remain selfish cannot see it. Only those who orient themselves in the service of others are able to see the light of Doth, in which all 10 Sephiro are united as one. I think Scott Circle exemplifies the secret architecture of DC. It's plain to see once you have the knowledge, but remains hidden to the general public. Most people who know the Tree of Life are more familiar with the Athanasius-Kircher version of 1652, which is arranged in 3 columns. The Kircher version is seen here in John Evelyn's plan to rebuild London after the Great Fire of 1666. Both he and Christopher Wren submitted plans based on the Tree of Life, although Wren's wasn't as in-your-face as Evelyn's. Neither were actually carried out, but it shows you this kind of esoteric symbolism wasn't anything new when DC was laid out a century after the Great Fire of London. As you've seen, there is a deep connection to Judaism, both in the Tree of Life and in the metrology of Richard Heath's larger cube that links Washington, D.C. with the mythical New Jerusalem in the Bible. To understand why both the Flower of Life and Tree of Life are in D.C., you need a 1-minute visual education in sacred geometry. The Flower of Life grows on the Tree of Life. Flower of Life geometry is based on the 2D reality that 6 circles fit perfectly around a central 7th, shown here with quarters. Flowers eventually bear fruit, and with a growth of circles we have the traditional Fruit of Life diagram, containing 13 circles. Connecting the dots reveals Metatron's cube, an important diagram in the study of sacred geometry. It was named after the biblical figure Enoch, who was transformed into the archangel Metatron. Metatron's cube contains the 5 Platonic solids, both in smaller and larger scales, like a fractal. Platonic solids figure prominently in Plato's philosophy, after whom they were named. The dots and the interstices encode the pattern of two intersecting Pythagorean tetractyses. This is the pattern on the dollar bill, in what is called glory above the eagle's head. Pythagoreans swore an oath to the tetractys, which was the most important symbol in their secret worship of number. All of this symbolism is interconnected in a system. Masons study for years to understand these things and advance through their degrees. Freemasonry is a remnant of an ancient mystery school. Look at how many lucky 13s are on the obverse of the Great Seal. We've already seen the 13 stars of glory over the eagle's head. In the eagle's claws there are 13 arrows, 13 leaves on the branches hold 13 olives, and there are 13 stripes on the shield. Perhaps having 13 colonies was no accident. Curiously, the eagle only has 9 tail feathers. Everything has a meaning in symbolism. The 13th degree of Scottish Freemasonry is called the Royal Arch of Solomon. It's about Enoch, descent into a vault, the arch, a triangle of gold, a cube of agate, and the name of God. Enoch supposedly excavated 9 chambers, think of the tail feathers, underneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, one below the other, each with a supporting arch. In the final chamber he placed a cube of agate, inset with a triangle of gold engraved with the holy name of God. By this sacred geometry, Rick Campbell has shown Enoch's cube is in fact Metatron's cube, the triangle within the cube. The name of God shown in Hebrew is called the Tetragrammaton, the most sacred 4-letter word in Judaism. The letters of the Tetragrammaton are traditionally shown in the Pythagorean tetractys because it encodes the Shem Ham Horash, or names of God, which in Jewish mystical tradition corresponds to 72 arrangements of the 4 holy letters. The practice of assigning numbers to letters is called gematria. Here we see how the letters in Enoch's triangle encode the number 72, the number of names of God. When you get deep enough into most religions, you eventually encounter a belief in the sacredness of number. Enoch was supposedly transformed into the archangel Metatron when he was 365 years old, his age being an obvious solar reference. Speaking of solar men being elevated to the divine, let's look at the Capitol building rotunda. This center point of American democracy figured prominently in Dan Brown's The Lost Symbol. Investigative mythologist William Henry has interpreted the significance of the Capitol building as the solemn temple at the heart of America. Looking up through the oculus in the Capitol dome, we see Constantino Brumidi's huge fresco entitled Apotheosis of George Washington. The word apotheosis means elevation of a man into God. George Washington is sitting on a rainbow up in the clouds surrounded by 13 maidens and flanked by the goddesses Liberty and Victory. Henry has dug up what was probably Brumidi's inspiration for depicting Washington riding on a rainbow in front of a stargate. Here is Jesus doing the same. Both are man become God. The fresco at the heart of America clearly elevates Washington into some kind of solar deity. 6 allegorical groupings in a hexagonal arrangement tell stories centered on the ancient gods Mercury, Vulcan, Ceres, Minerva, Neptune, and Columbia. What does all this pagan symbolism have to do with the official history of the United States? Nothing. There are 72 stars surrounding the fresco, recalling the names of God in Jewish mystical tradition. An astronomical take on this number of stars is the fact that it takes 72 years for the Earth to precess 1 degree. We'll be learning more about the precessional cycle in Rome. Looking deeper, there are several crypto-references to the Egyptian goddess Isis, particularly in the allegory of agriculture. Flora with exposed breast, and young America in liberty cap stand in front of Ceres, goddess of agriculture. A sheaf of wheat is often used to depict the goddess of nature, shown here as Virgo. An exposed breast and the liberty cap are well-known attributes of Isis, used extensively during the French Revolution. Here the symbols are shown together in Delacroix's Liberty Guiding the People. The goddesses personified on both sides of the Atlantic as nature, reason, liberty, freedom, and Columbia are all esoteric references to the Egyptian goddess Isis. Here's a silver dollar showing liberty with a liberty cap on a pole. This particular coin happens to be worth well over 6 figures today. The seal of the U.S. Senate shows the now familiar red cap as well. To top it off, the goddess Freedom on the outside of the Capitol Dome, and recently in the middle of the Capitol Visitor Center, are yet more depictions of you-know-who. The architects of the Capitol are clearly obsessed with the secret worship of Isis. Following the goddess Liberty upward, we see how the entire District of Columbia was originally surveyed by George Washington in 1791. The mile markers are placed ad quadratum, just like the elevation of the House of the Temple built more than a century later. This later organic interruption in the lower portion of the square became Alexandria, Virginia. In the ancient world, Isis had an important temple on the island of Pharos, just outside Alexandria, Egypt. Pharos was the location of the lighthouse of Alexandria, wonder of the ancient world. The light that shone from it was the Stella Maris, star of the sea, one of the many epithets for Isis. The highest point in Alexandria, Virginia, has a replica of the ancient lighthouse, in the form of the George Washington Masonic National Memorial. George Washington and many of the founding fathers were, of course, well-known Freemasons. Pay special attention to the 3 cubes forming the body of the lighthouse. We'll see this symbolism again in London, and finally decode it in Paris. How is it that we keep finding secret connections to Isis and ancient Egypt in a country that has no ostensible reason to make this symbolic linkage? Believe it or not, Pennsylvania Avenue is astronomically oriented to the heliacal rising of Sirius. The ancient Egyptians based their calendar on this phenomenon, which is the day when Isis's star, Sirius, is visible on the horizon just before sunrise. From the White House in early August, Sirius is visible a few minutes before sunrise, directly behind the Capitol building. From the perspective of the Capitol building, sunset on this same day passes straight down Pennsylvania Avenue and sets over the apex of the pyramid atop the National Post Office. If you overlay a pair of pentagrams over the Capitol building, a couple of interesting things occur. These edges follow Pennsylvania and Maryland Avenues, and RFK Stadium from 1961 is framed perfectly in the crook of the opposing pentagram. I noticed 4 radiating streets above and below the Capitol building. Then it clicked with the pentagrams, and I see what is actually depicted here is the Templar cross. Can there now be any doubt who is behind the program of symbolism in D.C.? The Templars may be long gone, but the Scottish Freemasons remain active today. We'll learn more about the Templars at Chartres Cathedral, and again in London. David Oveson's groundbreaking book, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, reveals that D.C. has more zodiacs than any city in the world, concentrated in what is called the Federal Triangle. The Federal Triangle contains many important governmental structures, including the National Archives, the National Post Office, the Departments of Justice and Commerce, and so on. Most importantly, Oveson shows how these Federal Triangle zodiacs draw attention to one constellation in particular, Virgo. Virgo the Virgin is an esoteric representation of Isis. Oveson's research into Masonic symbolism led him to map the stars Arcturus, Regulus, and Spica to a terrestrial triangle connecting the White House, Capitol building, and the point where many think the Washington Monument was supposed to be. You see, the Washington Monument is shifted slightly to the east with respect to the White House-Jefferson Memorial north-south axis. Some claim this shift was due to the fact that the marked point is on landfill, and the site where the monument was actually built is on solid ground. In any case, here is that particular stellar arrangement brought down to Earth. We see Virgo over the Federal Triangle, and Leo over the Capitol building. 18th century Masonic French astronomer Jérôme Lalande wrote, "The Virgin is consecrated to Isis, just as Leo is consecrated to her husband Osiris." So Isis is linked with the Federal Triangle, and Osiris with the Capitol building. The Virgin's right hand points to the White House, but her left hand is actually on the Washington Monument. This is very interesting to those who know the Isis story. Could Isis be holding Osiris's golden phallus in the form of the Washington Monument? As the ancient Egyptian story goes, it all started when Set became jealous of his brother Osiris, who was king of all Egypt, and whose girlfriend was the beautiful Isis. Set then deceived and killed Osiris, cut his body into 14 parts, sealed all but one of them in a coffin, and sent it down the Nile. As a final insult, he tossed Osiris's penis into the river. His sister consort Isis was at length able to recover and magically reconnect all of Osiris's parts, except for his penis, which was unfortunately eaten by a fish. Isis fashioned a golden phallus, attached it to Osiris, and brought him back to life with a song. From this experience, the resurrected Osiris became Lord of the Dead. Isis was impregnated with the golden phallus, and their son Horus grew to become god of the sun. It's the original story of sex and violence, jealousy, incest, and pregnancy. The Washington Monument is an obvious phallic symbol. The Vesica Pisces paths surrounding the obelisk suggest female genitals. Taken together, the symbols represent the joining of Osiris and Isis, and the conception of the sun god Horus. Now maybe you think I'm going too far at this point, but take a look at what is above the elevator that goes up the shaft of the Washington Monument, the same ride Robert Langdon took at the end of the lost symbol. Right above the elevator doors there is a bronze sculpture of George Washington, sculpted by French Freemason Houdon, and above that is the winged disc of Horus. What in the world does this Egyptian solar symbol have to do with America? It's a clue to the secret meaning of the obelisk, in the most public of places, but how many actually see it and understand? The dimensions of the monument are all 6s and 5s. What an amazing coincidence that 6,660 inches equals 555 feet. We'll decipher the meaning of 6s and 5s in Egypt. The Washington Monument is not a true obelisk cut from a single piece of stone. Instead, it is both literally and figuratively a monumental work of masonry. Bernard I. Peache's meticulous metrological study of the Washington Monument reveals a sacred diagram projected on the earth. Based on the exact height and angle of the pyramidion, its face and ridge lines project down to the ground and trace circles that are proportioned ad quadratum with respect to each other. The diagram shown here is called the octagram star in mathematics. It's a symbol used in many religions and cultures around the world. I'll briefly trace the octagram star through history to uncover its meaning. The earliest example I've found that has this symmetry is the Star of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess whom I think all the Isis obsession is ultimately based on. Archaeologists identify the Sumerian culture as the oldest civilization on Earth. Sumeria predated ancient Egypt, but it wasn't even discovered until 1890, so that must be why most esoteric references are to Isis rather than Inanna. I highly recommend reading the collective works of Zecharia Sitchin for an alternative, albeit controversial theory on the origins of civilization. But that's another documentary entirely. I have found the octagram star in many other places around the world. The Hindu star of Lakshmi is a pure octagram star. The Egyptian Ogdoad adds a central cosmic egg to the mix, containing the sun god Ra. The structure of the Celtic calendar resonates with the octagram star. The Gnostic theologian Valentius transformed Egyptian concepts into Christian ones in his 2nd century cosmology featuring the pleroma, or Godhead, in the center. The Buddhist Wheel of Dharma has this as its symbol, incorporating the Eightfold Path. Islam uses the Rub el-Hizb as its symbol. Found in the oldest Korans as a chapter marker, here it is expressed fractally in Muhammad's tomb in Medina. The Eastern Orthodox Church used octagram star symmetry in numerous depictions of Christ Pantocrator and in the Transfiguration. Even the seemingly unrelated Aztec culture produced their calendrical Piedra del Sol having this remarkable symmetry. Finally, the Vatican also encoded this powerful symbol in St. Peter's Square. The ancient Egyptian obelisk at its center is literally a gigantic sundial, with stones in the pavement marking the seasons. So the octagram star is resoundingly a solar symbol, appropriately fitting the male obelisk, which is the primary reading of the Washington Monument. However, female energy is not entirely neglected in the Washington Monument. We've already seen how a stretched Vesica Pisces symbol surrounds the obelisk. Rick Campbell has brought something even more hidden to light. If you draw a Vesica Pisces to scale, with the circle's diameters equal to the height of the Washington Monument's 555 feet, the Great Pyramid of Egypt fits perfectly inside the vulva. This is no accident. The architect who designed the Washington Monument must have wanted to secretly link it with the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid and the Washington Monument both have phi in their proportions, which is one of the most interesting numbers in mathematics.